You've probably never heard of the biggest urban planning disaster happening right now, but Indonesia is quietly spending $32 billion to build a brand new capital city from scratch, and it's turning into an absolute catastrophe. Here's the shocking truth: sometimes the solution to an environmental crisis can be far worse than the original problem itself. Most people think moving a capital city sounds reasonable when Jakarta is sinking into the ocean, right? Wrong. What's actually happening is one of the most reckless environmental experiments in modern history. They're destroying one of Earth's most precious rainforests to escape the consequences of destroying their previous environment. It's like trying to cure a hangover by drinking more alcohol. The curiosities surrounding this project will blow your mind. But here's what's really shocking: this isn't just Indonesia's problem anymore. Countries worldwide are watching this experiment because climate change is forcing similar decisions everywhere. The Curiosities Geographicas of what's happening in Borneo right now reveal uncomfortable truths about how far governments will go to maintain power, even if it means sacrificing entire ecosystems. Once you understand the full scope of this disaster, you'll never look at environmental policy the same way again. You know what's absolutely mind-blowing about geography? Some of the most fascinating Curiosities Geographicas happen right under our noses, and we barely notice them until it's almost too late. Take Jakarta, for instance. This massive metropolis that houses over 10 million people is literally sinking into the ground at a rate that would make your jaw drop. We're talking about 25 centimeters per year in some areas, which means entire neighborhoods are disappearing beneath the surface faster than you can say, geological disaster. It's like watching a slow-motion movie where the ground itself becomes the villain, and honestly, it's both terrifying and fascinating at the same time. The thing is, when you dig deeper into these curiosities about urban planning disasters, you realize that Jakarta's problem isn't just about sinking, it's about a perfect storm of human mistakes and natural consequences. The city's been pumping groundwater like there's no tomorrow because, well, they desperately need fresh water for millions of residents. But here's the kicker: when you remove all that water from underground, the land above literally collapses into the empty spaces, creating what geologists call land subsidence. Meanwhile, rising sea levels are pushing saltwater inland, making the whole situation even more dramatic and urgent than anyone initially predicted. What's really crazy about this whole Geographia situation is that experts have been warning about this for decades, but sometimes it takes a full-blown crisis to make people actually listen and take action. The Indonesian government finally realized they couldn't just put band-aids on a sinking ship, they needed a completely new approach. And that's where the story gets really interesting, because their solution involves one of the most ambitious and controversial urban planning projects in modern history. But before we dive into that rabbit hole of complexity and intrigue, there's something even more shocking about what they decided to do next. Picture this: the Indonesian government looks at their sinking capital and thinks, you know what? Let's just build a brand new one from scratch. And not just anywhere, they're talking about carving out a massive city right in the heart of Borneo's rainforest, calling it Nusantara. We're talking about a $32 billion project that's supposed to house 8.5 million people by 2045, which sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, doesn't it? The sheer audacity of this plan is both impressive and terrifying, because they're essentially saying, let's create a green, smart city that'll solve all our problems, while simultaneously bulldozing one of the world's most biodiverse ecosystems. Here's where the Geographia gets really wild: they've chosen East Kalimantan as the location, which is basically Indonesia's version of the Amazon rainforest. The government keeps talking about how this new capital will be a forest city that works in harmony with nature, but anyone who's studied urban development knows that's like saying you can have your cake and eat it too. The irony is absolutely mind-boggling when you think about it. They're trying to escape the environmental disaster of Jakarta by creating what could potentially become an even bigger environmental disaster. It's one of those curiosities that makes you wonder if decision-makers actually understand the concept of cause and effect. What's really fascinating about this whole Nusantara project is the timeline they've set for themselves. They want to start moving government offices there by 2024, which is incredibly ambitious considering they're building a city from literally nothing. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night thinking about this. When you look at the track record of massive infrastructure projects in developing countries, especially ones involving relocating entire capitals, the results are, well, let's just say they're not always as rosy as the initial promises. And speaking of promises, wait until you hear about what this project is actually going to cost the environment. It's way more devastating than most people realize. Now here's where things get absolutely heartbreaking, and I mean that literally. The environmental cost of building Nusantara is like watching someone burn down a library full of irreplaceable books just to make room for a parking lot. We're talking about clearing roughly 56,000 hectares of primary rainforest, which is home to critically endangered species like orangutans, sun bears, and countless other creatures that exist nowhere else on Earth. These Curiosities de natureza took millions of years to evolve, and they're about to disappear in a matter of decades because of urban planning decisions. It's like Indonesia is trading its natural heritage for concrete and steel, and honestly, it breaks my heart every time I think about it. The geography of Borneo is incredibly complex and delicate. This isn't just any forest, it's one of the oldest rainforests on the planet, with an ecosystem so intricate that scientists are still discovering new species every year. When you start chopping down trees and building roads through this kind of environment, you're not just removing vegetation, you're disrupting water cycles, destroying wildlife corridors, and releasing massive amounts of stored carbon into the atmosphere. The ripple effects are mind-blowing: changes in local weather patterns, increased flooding, soil erosion, and the complete destruction of habitats that took millennia to develop. It's like pulling threads from a tapestry and watching the whole thing unravel before your eyes. But here's what really gets me fired up about this situation. The Indonesian government keeps talking about sustainable development and green cities, while simultaneously planning to destroy one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. It's like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth, promising environmental protection while doing the exact opposite. The scientific community has been screaming about this for years, publishing study after study showing how this project could accelerate climate change and biodiversity loss. Yet somehow, the political machinery keeps moving forward, prioritizing short-term economic gains over long-term environmental stability. And if you think the environmental impact is bad, wait until you see what this project is doing to the people who actually live there. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the people who are getting completely steamrolled by this massive project. The indigenous communities and local residents of East Kalimantan have been living in harmony with this forest for generations, and now they're being told their ancestral lands are needed for national development. It's one of those heartbreaking curiosities of modern politics where progress for some means displacement for others. We're talking about entire villages being relocated, traditional ways of life being disrupted, and people who've never lived anywhere else suddenly having to adapt to a completely different reality. The compensation packages? Well, let's just say they're nowhere near adequate for what these communities are losing. The economic promises sound amazing on paper: new jobs, infrastructure development, increased investment in the region. But here's what the government isn't telling you about these grand geographic transformations. Most of the high-paying jobs will go to educated professionals from Jakarta and other major cities, while the local population will likely end up in low-wage service positions. It's like building a fancy restaurant in your neighborhood and then only being able to afford washing dishes there. The cost of living is expected to skyrocket once the new capital starts taking shape, which means the very people whose land is being used for this project might not even be able to afford living there anymore. What's really mind-boggling about this whole situation is the sheer scale of social engineering that's happening here. The Indonesian government is essentially trying to create a new society from scratch, mixing displaced Jakartans with relocated locals and hoping everything will work out smoothly. But anyone who's studied urban sociology knows that forced migrations and rapid demographic changes rarely go according to plan. There's going to be cultural friction, economic inequality, and social tensions that nobody's really prepared for. And here's the kicker: if this experiment fails, it won't just be a policy mistake, it'll be a human tragedy on a massive scale. But before we write this off as a complete disaster, there might actually be some valuable lessons hidden in this chaos. Here's the thing that absolutely fascinates me about this whole Nusantara situation: it's like Indonesia is conducting a massive real-world experiment that every other country on Earth should be paying attention to. Climate change is forcing governments everywhere to make tough decisions about urban planning, and Indonesia is basically the guinea pig testing whether you can solve environmental problems by simply moving your capital city. Countries like Egypt are already planning new capitals, Nigeria has been discussing it for years, and even places like South Korea have relocated government functions. These curiosities about capital relocation are becoming more common as cities face rising sea levels, overcrowding, and infrastructure collapse. The Geographical lessons from this project are absolutely mind-blowing when you think about the bigger picture. We're witnessing what happens when a country tries to balance economic development with environmental protection, and spoiler alert, it's not going well. Other nations dealing with similar challenges should be taking notes on what not to do. Don't promise environmental sustainability while destroying pristine ecosystems, don't underestimate the social costs of mass relocation, and definitely don't rush into billion-dollar projects without proper environmental impact assessments. Countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and the Philippines, which are also dealing with sinking cities and climate change, could learn valuable lessons from Indonesia's mistakes. What's really incredible about this whole situation is that we're watching history unfold in real time. This could either become a model for how countries adapt to climate change, or it could become a cautionary tale about how not to handle urban planning crises. The scientific data coming out of this project over the next decade will be absolutely crucial for understanding the true costs and benefits of capital relocation. Whether Nusantara succeeds or fails, the lessons learned will influence urban planning decisions for generations to come. Other countries are literally watching Indonesia's every move, ready to either copy their success or learn from their failures. And honestly, given everything we've discussed about the environmental destruction, social displacement, and questionable economics, I think we all know which direction this experiment is heading. So here's the million-dollar question: what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to sit back and watch other governments make the same reckless decisions, or start demanding better environmental policies from your leaders? The curiosities we've explored today aren't just fascinating geography facts, they're warning signs of what happens when politicians prioritize short-term gains over environmental protection. Look up your city's climate plans right now and see if they're actually sustainable or just political theater like Indonesia's disaster. Don't let this be just another video you forget about. If this opened your eyes to what's really happening with environmental policy, smash that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel with notifications on. Because the next time a government promises to solve climate change by destroying the environment, you'll be ready to call them out on their lies.